Hello, BookTube. Oh, we're back down in puppy territory for our ongoing library tour here. I think I can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel. This might be coming to an end. This shelf, anyway. But it's all, as you've noticed if you've seen the previous endless installments of this library tour, these are all mass-market paperbacks. This is where my mass-market paperbacks drained from the rest of my collection. They used to be everywhere. And now this is their last holdout. And I'm just going to go through this next stack. I'm sure that the pattern that we've seen so far is going to repeat itself, where we see lots of doubles of books we've already seen. So I'm going to operate on two assumptions. One, that as a cranky old man, I get to repeat myself as often as I like. And two, that some of you won't have seen those earlier library tours, and so these might be new to you. So let's see. Okay, and the very first one is a double, but it's utterly delightful. It's the Golden Book of Birds. This little thing, this little series that used to be made that gives you all kinds of ways to attract birds, and then goes through, with these lovely illustrations, goes through their nature, their range throughout America, their breeding and plumage and whatnot. Just a delightful little thing to have in your pocket. Okay. All right, this next one is also a little golden guide. This is a golden guide to bats, my very own bats. An animal that I have studied quite a bit, both in books and in the field, as they put it. And this is the same thing. This has distribution of major things. Look at the lovely sunset on that. And illustrations of several popular bats in America. Okay. This is also one we've seen before. Star Trek New Earth, Wagon Train to the Stars. The first book in a multi-part series in which are the classic Captain Kirk crew of the Enterprise, having returned home from their mission and achieved a kind of legendary status, agree to accept an assignment guarding a convoy of settlers to a far distant planet. The settlers are hoping to make a life of their own outside the Federation, to get back to subsistence roots instead of the life in the Federation where everything is so easy. But Starfleet has decided that having them fall prey to marauders or all get slaughtered would look bad. So Starfleet has insisted on sending two smaller military vessels and an actual starship. And the starship they send is their PR Victory, the Enterprise under Captain Kirk. And it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful Star Trek. Now, Diane Carey never wrote a bad Star Trek novel, but this one is wonderful because it uses as one of its active elements the fact that our crew is no longer young, that they've seen it all, and that they're legends for a reason. And that's really nice. Diane Carey does that really well. She also doesn't sell the settlers short. It would be easy to do. A less confident science fiction writer might have made the settlers pie-in-the-sky idealists. But even their would-be governor, a young man, who is an idealist, is given more dimension than that, which is very nice. Okay, all right. This is a collection of short stories by the great Cordwainer Smith. The Instrumentality of Mankind is the title of the collection, which is also the name of a ruling group of semi-immortal telepaths who rule the future Earth in which all of these stories are set. Cordwainer Smith's Instrumentality of Mankind novels are incredible. They are amazingly good. Let's see what's... Oh, and somebody, I think it was J.J. Pierce, who was a frequent Cordwainer Smith editor, somebody was wonky enough to create a timeline of the Instrumentality of Mankind so that you know where all the stories fall. But what is in here? God, I haven't read these in so long. Mark Elf is in here, Queen of the Afternoon, The People Who Fell, Think Blue, Count Two, classic story. The Colonel Who Came Back from Nothing at All. Wonderful. Okay. All right, classic science fiction. But as we've seen in this library tour so far, my science fiction is not together, which is an offense. I'm as aware of that as any of you who have emailed me. It's an offense that it's not all together. So I will be, as soon as this endless library tour is done, I will be fixing this. Oh, great. Okay, great. I think we might have seen a copy of this somewhere else. This is Bruce Brillivan, The Battle for Manhattan. Just a thin Penguin history of the title is actually a bit of a misnomer. There were almost no battles. This is the study of a history of George Washington's retreat down the length of Manhattan, his surrender of Manhattan to steadily encroaching British forces. He knew perfectly well that if he tried to meet those forces in a standard 18th century full-dress battle with cannons and rows of marksmen and whatnot, he would lose instantly. He knew that perfectly well. So he knew that he couldn't do that, even though that's the kind of military commander he wanted to be. So instead, over his strong urgings, his subordinates and generals and whatnot, orchestrated a truly brilliant ground-seeding campaign. There's a lot to the retreat down Manhattan. There's a lot to it. It's a fascinating story. There aren't many counterparts like it in relatively modern history of retreats done that well. Dunkirk, of course, comes to mind, but you have to go back a long way. you might think, well, what could be easier than running away? But actually, that's not true. in the military world, an organized retreat that minimizes your losses is extremely difficult to do, and that's what this book is the story of. And it's never been equal. This came out probably 60 years ago. God, I don't even know. 1955, and it's never been equal on the subject. What is this next one? It's tiny. Oh, okay. All right. It's tiny for a reason. I have it because it's tiny. This is a tiny little pocket book edition of Shropshire Lad by E. Houseman. His incredibly popular collection of poetry from. Oh God. Oh my. Okay. This just has. I forgot. It has illustrations. And then the poems, and wow. This is a classic, iconic poetry collection, and I'm sure that the reason I got it here is because I wanted a little paperback that I could just put anywhere and carry with me, and yet it's buried down on the shelf and is never serving that function. That's kind of odd, and I'm afraid now. My first impulse is to say, I wish a Shropshire Lad were in a Penguin Classic. But I'm afraid to do that now because there'll be 10 of you who will come out of the woodwork and say, oh yeah, they've made it into a classic. It's made into a Penguin Classic. You did that with Travels in West Africa by Mary Kingsley. I said I wish it were a Penguin Classic, and half a dozen of you emailed me and said it is a Penguin Classic. And yet, of that half dozen, have any of you sent it to me? No. Nobody sent me a copy because you all hate me because I smell. Anyway, what is this next one? Oh, okay. This is just a paperback overview, a scholarly overview, 7 Centuries of Irish Learning. All sorts of documents and literary terms and quotations, lots and lots of quotations, that made me love it when I first read it, but that was, God, I don't even know. The 1970s. And I've never seen it since. I've never read it since. I've never had any desire to read it since. I don't know what it's doing here. So you were wondering when that refrain was going to come up, didn't you? Let's see. Okay, this next one is one we've seen before here. We'll see it again, I'm sure. Because I buy these things whenever I see them, in the hopes that I will just sort of wait out this dry period and wait until it's all reprinted. This is The Journeys of McGill Fayen by Kevin O'Donnell. This is volume 3, but there were 4 volumes, and then the series stopped. It's the story of our title character, McGill Fayen, who is a flinger. It takes place in the future, in which a certain group of humans, actually, they're not just all humans, but a certain group of beings, for whatever reason, an inbred mutation or solar flares or divine intervention, can, through an act of concentration, teleport a discrete amount of weight in organic or inorganic material from one point to another that they know, which makes them invaluable for commerce and personal transportation. And that is the backdrop. That workaday reality is the backdrop of the adventures that McGill Fayen, the flinger in these books, who decides not to just be a workaday drudge. That's the backdrop of the stories. And it's just, they're fantastic. They're so, so fun. Speaking of fun, this is When London Walked in Terror by Tom Gullen. This is this is from the 1970s, I think. 1965. This is an old narrative of the Jack the Ripper, in 1888, the Jack the Ripper murders. It's superheated prose, but it's not wrong. There's very little factual inaccuracy in here. It's just meant to be grippingly read. It's meant to keep you turning pages and a little bit afraid of that noise in the next room. And it does that. It works really effectively. I would love it if I could find more copies of this, because people often ask me. I have a deep fascination with the Jack the Ripper case. I think it's fascinating, and I've written about it. If I remember, with all of these things, if I have any connected writing of my own, and I remember, I will put it down below on the off chance that any of you are reading those links. But people often ask me when they know that it fascinates me. They often ask me, "Well, what's a book that I can read?" And I recommend all sorts of other books because they're more readily available, but this one is a corker of a starting point. If only it existed more, but I never see it, so I'm not going to recommend it to somebody. But anyway, what's next? Oh goodness gracious! This is more Star Trek fiction, also by Diane Carey. This is a multi-part series, Star Trek Deep Space Nine: The Dominion War. This is book 2, but I think it went up to 6 books. No, 4. It went up to 4 books, and it dramatizes the scripts for the key episodes of Deep Space Nine, in which the Dominion, this all extremely aggressive military power from the other side of the galaxy, uses a wormhole, a stationary warp in space-time, to invade the Alpha Quadrant, the place where all of Star Trek takes place. So, and even if you're not a Star Trek fan, you're going to hear that synopsis and know right away, wow, that's about as epic a story as anyone could come up with. Oh, hello. Hello there. You want to say hi? I did say we were in puppy territory. But anyway, like I was saying, the writers of Deep Space Nine came up with this story where an aggressive military power invades the Alpha Quadrant. And you know, as a longtime Star Trek fan, you know what you want from such a storyline. You don't know how long it'll take you to get there, but you know what you want. What you want is for everybody in the Alpha Quadrant eventually to realize their danger and ally themselves with each other. The Federation, fine, you know that'll happen. And at the time of this story, the Federation and the Klingon Empire had been allies for a long time. This story throws a monkey wrench in that, but then recovers it. And what you're waiting for are the Romulans. You're waiting for everybody. You're waiting for all of the people who were enemies in the original show to team up together, and what would happen if they did. And it's an epic story. Deep Space Nine, of course, was a TV show. Had an astronomical budget according to the lights of the original Star Trek, but it still had a limited budget. The warfare scenes in the episodes devoted to the Dominion War in Deep Space Nine are incredible. They're like something you would see in a movie, but they were very expensive. So Deep Space Nine often had to resort to telling smaller keyhole stories around the war, and we would just hear about the war because they couldn't show it to us. Novels, of course, don't have that kind of restriction, and yet the Dominion War 4-parter, Diane Carey's book is great. It's fantastic, as always, but it's fantastic on a personal level rather than panoramic. I was kind of hoping that once Paramount greenlit the Dominion War as a book, or a series of books, we would get a lot of the things that we didn't see on screen at Deep Space Nine, and we don't get that. We don't get any of that. We get basically written versions of all the episodes, and that's a bit of a shame. There's a story there. I mean, there's tons and tons of Star Trek fiction about the Dominion War, but there's a larger story, a bigger book that could be written. That, again, it makes me wish that the Paramount book division for Star Trek were more adventurous than they are. Star Trek is an anemic, almost dead bookstore presence these days. And that's a crime, considering the fan base connection, considering the history. That could be the exact opposite. It could be a massively fan-involved thing, and it's not. I don't quite know why that is. Anyway, let's move on here. Oh, good. Okay, this is another double of an old book. This is Claudia by Robert de Mariglia. This is a novel of ancient Rome, a novel of the the titular troublemaker, Clodia, but also of her most famous lover, the poet Catullus. And it's delightful. It ranks, in my top echelon of the best Roman historical novels ever written, and yet it's the one no one's ever heard of. Everyone's heard of Spartacus. Everyone's heard of Ben-Hur. No one's heard of this, and they should. Let's see. Oh, okay, great. Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't know I had this. This is an old pocket paperback of Dick Francis. This one is Risk. Racetrack Murder Mysteries. I'm glad I have this because we're coming up on March Mystery Madness, when I'm going to devote a much greater percentage of my reading during the month of March than usual to murder mysteries, old and new, and talk about it all with you until you're so bored that you never want to hear the words March Mystery Madness. When you're talking about mysteries, you have to mention Dick Francis. That would be. I didn't know that I had any Dick Francis. Now I do. Good. Okay, great. Okay, this is another favorite. This is Tales of Ancient Egypt by Roger Lancelin Green, who was a popularizer of mythology generations ago and did a wonderful job. His books are so good. This is the reason why his books have imprinted so many people, especially when they're young, that publishers keep reprinting them. And Puffin did this. This was not originally a Puffin book, but this book you can still find in a new reprint in your local Barnes & Noble, and that's amazing for a book that's old as these. Because I don't even know. I don't know if it'll tell me how old this originally was. No. Okay. Well, it's 50 years old at least, and this is just popular stories from Egyptian mythology, neutered out of all of their native strangeness, but given a narrative line, a through line that they didn't originally possess. Roger Lancelin Green does that with the myths of the ancient Egyptians. He does that with the Norse mythology. He most famously does that with Greek mythology. Always to good effect. His books are wonderful to read. This next one is a hardcover. It's a little red hardcover. Is it a Loeb Classical Library? Oh, no, it's not a Loeb. Oh, my goodness. No, this is The Reign of Mary Tudor by J.A. Froude. This is an old book. Good Lord. Well, this edition, of course, this is an everyman's library from when they used to look just opulent. And when they used to be pocket size. They used to be something that you would put in your pocket. I don't actually remember when Froude actually wrote this, but it was at the beginning of the 20th century. This is a study of Queen Mary and power, and it's really good. It's never been equaled, despite how old it is. It's also beautifully written. So I don't know what it's doing here. It should be over with the royal biographies. Then we've got a Penguin classic of some kind. Oh, okay. This is a little Penguin classic of the satires of Horace and Persius by Neil Rudd. Both of them translated by Neil Rudd. I've mentioned before on this channel that I'm not all that big on English language translations of Latin classics, and especially Horace, or especially Catullus. And this definitely falls under that heading. I don't think I would ever voluntarily read these translations again, although a big standalone book of Persius would be great. I hesitate to say that it should exist as a Penguin Classic, because some of you will tell me that it already does, and then refuse to send it to me. Let's remember the rule here, okay? Send me every Penguin trade paperback that you find. Every single one. And if you feel that that's an unrealistic demand, just consider it tribute sent to Mordor. Would you rather send the tribute? Or would you rather I send the Nazgul? Anyway, okay, this next one's another Penguin Classic. This is The Praise of Folly by Erasmus. His weird game-playing satire on the corruption of the church that's doing so many things at the same time that I keep expecting it to fall out of his control, and it never does. Wow. Okay, just a battered old Penguin trade mass market. Again, I don't know what these are doing out here. I have all of my Penguins together, even the mass markets, in the other room. So these shouldn't be out here. And then our last one. What is our last one? Oh. We end on a true classic. Meg! By Steve Alton. This cover dramatizes the very first scene in the novel, which takes place in prehistoric times, in which a Tyrannosaurus Rex wades out into the water and is promptly killed by a megalodon. And the original cover didn't look like this. And I I have the original mass market here, many different copies of it, I'm sure. But when I saw this for 50 cents somewhere, I grabbed it because that's just too good a cover to pass up. And there you have it. That is our latest stack in the Puppy Territory Library Tour. We don't have much longer to go, and then we'll have to find something else to do. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.